I call the honourable member for Kooyong and the Parliamentary Secretary to the PM.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, I can understand the frustration of the Leader of the Opposition because this is the first year in 3 years where he hasn't been able to stab the back of a Prime Minister. I just want to say to the Leader of the Opposition, if he was as good as policy as he is as scripted one-liners, then maybe his party wouldn't have got the worst result in 100 years. And I just want to remind the Leader of the Opposition that the worst day in government is better than the best day in opposition, because we in government are making a difference. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is the 70th year of the Liberal Party, the 75th year since our founder Sir Robert Menzies first became Prime Minister. And when he established our party, he did so believing in a progressive party, one that believed in the power of the individual, in free enterprise, in helping those who can't help themselves, in ensuring smaller and more efficient government. And when you look at our record over just the last year, we meet all those criteria and we excel them. And if you want to talk about the performance of individual ministers, let me go through some of their achievements, starting with the Treasurer, the Minister for Small Business and the Minister for Finance, who have led our economic team. They have reduced the overall tax burden for Australians by removing that terrible carbon tax, a $9 billion hit on the Australian economy and a $550 hit on all Australian families. And what about the mining tax? That's removing $50 billion for the budget bottom line. It was supposed to project all this revenue, which never eventuated, but what it did do is introduce the dark spectre of sovereign risk into our country. And what about the 96 unenacted but announced tax and superannuation measures that those opposite introduced when they were in government, only to bring uncertainty to the budgetary situation of so many of our economies? And what about the 76 bodies that we have abolished to ensure that government is now streamlined and more efficient? And what about the sale of government enterprises, the successful sale of government enterprises to ensure that government is not both the regulator and the operator? And there is no better example than the sale of Medibank Private for $5.7 billion, $1 billion more than was expected. And now we have scoping studies into Australian hearing, into the Assets Registry, and also into defence housing, because we believe that government shouldn't be in the business where private sector can. And of course, the most important job of budget repair, $300 billion of fiscal consolidation over the next decade. Now, politics, according to Bismarck, is the art of the possible. So we have to negotiate with a difficult Senate from a minority position. But we are doing it successfully thanks to the good work of our economic team. And what about for small business? As the Minister told us during question time, more than 500,000 jobs in small business were lost over the term of the Rudd, Gillard and Rudd governments. And we have introduced now a whole suite of measures, including more than 400,000 small businesses which won't have to go through the PAYG system. And this has ensured that we have had tens of thousands of new small business registrations. And in my own area of deregulation, we set ourselves an ambitious target of $1 billion a year in cutting red tape. And what have we done? We've actually surpassed that. We've more than doubled it with $2.1 billion worth of announced measures to cut red and green tape, and some of them are so important. Including for small business, for agriculture and our farmers, and right across the economy. So it's been a very good year, Mr Deputy Speaker, when it comes to our economic measures. What about the environment? The Minister for the Environment has got his $2.5 billion direct action plan through the Senate. He's got his Green Army proposal through the Senate. We've got a good position on the renewable energy target, which we believe should be a 20% target, and of course he's abolished the carbon tax, so that's a proud record when it comes to the environment. And what about health? What about health? Those opposite talk about the cuts to health. I'll talk about the boost to health. More than 40% increase in funding over the forward estimates, $5.3 billion extra of money for hospitals and health over the forward years? And what about the changes that we are adopting to the Therapeutic Goods Administration through our announcement that processes, systems and products that have been approved overseas can come into Australia if it's been done by a trusted international jurisdiction? That is good news because it means medical devices and means medicines can now get to market quicker and we can have more choice for consumers at lower cost. And of course, our Medical Research Future Fund, which is just a great development, plays to our strength, because if we can get medical research right, then we can find the cures for the future. And what about education? A 37% increase, a $4.9 billion funding increase over the forward years, when those opposite never would have fully funded Gonski, and we have increased our education funding. And of course, the important higher education changes, which have been strongly supported right across the tertiary sector. And what about in infrastructure? A $50 billion spend, the Pacific Highway, the Bruce Highway, the West Connect, and we hope the East-West Link in Victoria. And after 50 years of indecision, we have now got a second airport on the cards for New South Wales. Again, a very important decision, but again, we are making a difference when it comes to infrastructure, not just with the big projects, but also the $500 million for black spots and the $2.5 billion for the roads to recovery. When it comes to the NBN, over the last year alone, more than double the number of businesses and homes have actually got access to the NBN than previously. It was over budget. It was slow in the rollout under those opposite. We have taken that performance and we have reshaped it with a much better scheme under the leadership of our Minister for Communications. And what about trade? What about those 3 free trade agreements, which are the hallmark of this government's achievements in just its first year? It took 6 years for those opposite to diddle and daddle and produce no results. We've got an agreement with Korea, which will lead to 98 or 99% of our products going into Korea tariff-free over the future years. What about Japan? And of course, what about China? Big gains in agriculture when we're seeing the abolition of tariffs for beef and for dairy and for horticulture. What about in resources, where we're seeing coking coal and thermal coal tariffs come off and aluminium oxide? And what about in services? 70% of the Australian economy, but just 17% of our exports. And of course, now education, health, insurance, financial services can actually get into the Chinese economy when they couldn't previously. This is a groundbreaking agreement, one we are proud of and one which will create jobs into the future. And what about on foreign policy? The Minister for Foreign Affairs has done a brilliant job with her new Colombo plan, her initiative. 1,300 undergraduates from Australia going to experience what life is like in the region. They will be ambassadors. They will be ambassadors for Australia, just like the Colombo plan more than 50 years ago under Percy Spender was for 40,000 people. And what about the way we have handled the tough issues of defence and national security? New counter-terrorism legislation, thanks to the good work of the Attorney General. Boosting funding and support for the Defence Forces, given that those opposite reduced defence spending to the lowest level since 1938 at just 1.49% of GDP, and what a disgrace that was. And of course, we are there when it counts, trying to defeat ISIL or ISIS or Daesh or whatever you're going to call the group in Iraq and in Syria, with our deployment over there of our Air Force and our Special Forces, because Australia will not shirk those challenges when they are critical to the security here at home. And we have seen the good work of our Federal Police and of ASIO and of our other intelligence services in trying to foil attempts to hurt Australian citizens here at home. And who can forget our success when it comes to border protection? Those opposite ridiculed us by saying we couldn't stop the boats, you couldn't turn back the boats, you couldn't do so without damaging the relationship with Indonesia. Who remembers the then leader of the government, Kevin Rudd, talking about confrontasi with Indonesia if we would actually go down the path of the turn back the boat policy? But we have been successful thanks to the fantastic work of the Minister for Immigration and his officials. We have succeeded where those haven't. And then I want to finish, Mr Deputy Speaker, with the G20, because that was Australia's moment in the sun in Brisbane. 85% of the world's GDP here, 75% of the world's trade and 2/3 of the world's population. They saw Australia at its finest. They saw Australia and they produced outcomes, whether it was in infrastructure, growth, tax, shadow banking and a whole series of others. We have made a difference with G20 thanks to leadership, Prime Minister. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am proud of what we have achieved over the last year. We have succeeded where those have failed and they will see the result at the election in 2016. Thank you.